Hello and welcome to the Pivot Leadership Podcast. I'm Emma Chandler and I'm excited to have you here today as we explore the science of leadership, dive into how the brain works and hopefully learn a few things that will transform the way you lead. I created the Pivot framework to help leaders change their work environments for the better by harnessing the power of neuroscience. Whether you're guiding your team through change or looking to elevate your own leadership game, this podcast is designed to help you unlock the next level of success. So what does it mean to pivot? Well, it's all about mastering perseverance, inclusion, value, optimisation, and trust. These 5 principles are the building blocks of leadership that lasts. Throughout this podcast, I'll be joined by inspiring guests as we unpick each of these competencies and share actionable insights on how to apply them. So lean in, get ready to lead, pivot, and unlock your potential. In this episode, I'm joined by Louise Kennedy. Louise is the owner and director of the multi-award-winning Northeast HR consultancy, Oculus HR. The Sunderland-based organisation provides tailored HR solutions for many of the region's most reputable brands across all sizes and sectors, giving enterprises the confidence to manage their people. Established in 2013, Oculus HR offers companies a range of services including outsourced HR support and training. I've invited Louise on the podcast today to discuss how performance management can enhance team productivity, engagement and success, whilst exploring strategies to optimise teams in the modern workplace. Welcome to the podcast, Louise.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to having our conversation today.
I know this is, for me, a great podcast spot, so thanks for coming on and sharing with us your knowledge. I've been kind of fishing around on this topic of performance management for a while, and when I designed the Pivot program, I wanted to kind of reframe, if you like, the kind of terminology around performance management because it felt like such a powerful kind of terminology for something that I felt was more about, was a force for good. So it was something more positive. And when I looked at the work that you did and I talked to you on your podcast, I thought you would have some expertise here that could help us kind of unpack that and decode what performance management actually is and help leaders to basically not be afraid of it, avoid it, and actually get into it using optimizing strategies. So thank you so much for coming on.
No, and we've just done a session recently with entrepreneurs around performance management. So that's been really good. So hopefully we'll add a little bit more into this as well from different people's viewpoint of what we've just done.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome timing then for us. Thank you. So can you tell our listeners a little bit more, firstly, about you and what you've done in your work so far and how you've kind of come to start your own consultancy?
Yeah, so as I say, the business started in 2013. So prior Oculus, I worked in manufacturing and automotive in HR. So kind of did my master's whilst working in manufacturing, then went on to work in automotive and was there for about 8 years. So within the Northeast, you obviously got the Nissan factory. I was working for a tier 1 supplier at the time. So it was kind of through the whole life cycle of the vehicle that we did, which was really, really a great experience because it went everything from kind of the strategy all the way through to the operational side of things. So the wealth of knowledge that came from that was just kind of completely invaluable. I left there and thought really now was the opportunity to be able to just go out and give it a try. And I always think at that point I was in a porta cabin on the Nissan site, and it was literally kind of like walking out into the light, to see. I didn't know whether it was going to work, whether it was going to be successful, kind of starting a business up, 2 children, 2 cars, houses, like all these things that I needed to make sure that kind of covered the costs on. So it had to work, so it had to really work. So from my point of view, it was kind of initially starting out, I think there was going to be manufacturing, but then we kind of, grew into all sorts of different areas. So where we are kind of 11 years later is the fact that we work with what we class as like the transactional day-to-day side of things of HR with so many different sectors and so many different businesses. And it can be anything from meeting somebody to do a disciplinary, doing a grievance, dismissing somebody, doing a gross misconduct dismissal, or it can be really helping them out about how they can develop the people within the business. And it's interesting, different sizes businesses do different things. The smaller businesses just need to get by. then, trying to introduce newer things such as performance management into there is really interesting, how you can then see the business grow and develop through that element of it. More recently, we've then developed new services that we've put out really from about midway through this year. So they're things like HR mentoring, HR coaching. We do things like training with them, some masterclass training, but we also do like a Rising Stars program. So we do loads of different type of things. And then we've got one of our people that go out to do a chief people officer role in a business as well. So we've got kind of a complete variety, but I think we're very much now as that whole encompassing HR department, which is great. So it's great from my point of view that the business continues to grow month on month. We've just been having a strategy meeting there this morning around it. And it's kind of to see that development, it kind of really gives me the enjoyment out of it, because you get so much experience, like to be able to come on and share the stories with what it is that we're talking about today.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I love hearing about your business story. And I love seeing the awards that I've seen that you've been up for a few awards and you've won some awards there. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so over the last couple of years, really, probably about the last 18 months within the local area, we've got Entrepreneur of the Year, got Business of the Year, we got Small Business of the Year, we got highly commended for Best Independent Business of the Year. Then kind of from a across the country side of things, we were shortlisted for the top 5 HR consultancies last year for the Personnel Today Awards, which was amazing to be
That's
in that
amazing.
category. And just to be in that room, actually, it was probably one of the best events that I've been to, like award events. So I like going there, we get all dressed up and things, but it was such an achievement to be there in that room, that actually for what we've done across the country, that we've really put there. And sometimes you forget those things, you're so busy in the day-to-day element of it. It's that recognition for me and the team that we're doing a good job and we're doing it out there as well, but also for other people to be able to see that that's what we're doing. So it's been really good to really appreciate the opportunities that have come because of that as well.
Yeah, massive congratulations to you for that. I saw that and I thought, wow, that's so neat. I'm really pleased for you. Okay, so we're in safe hands on this podcast then, talking about this kind of topic. So what I kind of want to get into is, what is performance management to you? How would you unpack performance management, and why do you think it's essential in the workplace for success? Because you talked a bit about that in your intro.
Yeah, I think performance management is such a broad wording, isn't it? I was thinking about this morning from the point of view of, you have performance management around the regularity of performance. So whether it's from the point of somebody starting into a business, working through the probation period and kind of unpack that. And then, the regularity of what you do after that, very much the performance management, looking at KPIs and being able to, whether it's financially motivated or not, there's that element of it. But then there's also the other element, which comes under the same remit, around where people aren't performing particularly well in the business. And there's a performance management policy in place, and that, people are kind of go through a step-by-step process to try and bring the performance to where they need it within the business as well. Now, I think they're sit as being two different camps, really, but in essence, they're still called the same name. And I think that's where sometimes there can be a confusion around that within the workplace about what people decide that they are going to do. And because people think they don't want it to be a negative experience. And I think if you're going to do it, it's got to be done well, because otherwise it does turn into negativity. If you think, and Emma, you'll have heard this over the years within different workplaces of, well, what's the point in doing an appraisal once a year? It's a tick box exercise. Nobody's really bothered. And if you're doing it for that sake, then it's not worth doing, because actually you need the employee to be valued and the employer to get the value out of the employee. And it needs to be very much a two-way relationship about how you develop your people, or even just ensure that the people that are in your business who don't necessarily want to take the next step up, but are comfortable where they are, doing what they're doing, and just really being able to, grow in themselves, or to be comfortable at work. They don't always need to be going up the scale. So I think it's so important from a workplace point of view that if you're gonna do it right. Don't do it just for the sake of doing it. And I think you do come across many businesses that do that. So it's about how to position it correctly. And then I think what I said there at the beginning, for me, onboarding is such an important part of the business. And I think a lot of businesses aren't doing that very successfully at the moment. And I think performance management plays a key part of that onboarding. And as things start to change with all the employment law side of things, that'll change in the coming months/year. And we start seeing that, those day one rights are in place, and that you haven't got that flexibility in the first 2 years. You really need to get the onboarding right around performance management. And I think that is very much around, and all businesses will do it in different ways, but very much bring somebody in, explain to them what the standards and expectations are, then set up that regular review during the probation period, whether that's touch base once a month on a formal basis or every other month that do it, but once you get to that 6 months point, which is a reasonable amount of time for a probation period, although the government's starting to think that 9 months is more appropriate, but 6 months period, that actually you've had many touch base points. Because we speak to some companies and they say, they're rubbish, let's just get rid of them. And you say, have you ever spoke to them about it? Or have
Yeah.
you done any performance with them? And they go, well, no, they just should have known what to do. Well, why should they know what to do? So I think it's those steps that need to be put in place at that point, which then enables the employee to know that their employee is interested in them, that they want to take ownership for them, and then they want to do the best for them and develop them, whether it's, new training or, paid for training or mentoring or buddying or coaching or whatever it might look like. But then that next few steps, which will be the regularity of what the performance management would be annually, biannually, whatever it would look like, is then really takes hold and takes shape of it, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I kind of took a couple of notes there. So it's kind of brought me around to another two questions that, you said there, if we're going to do it, we need to do it right. So I'm kind of keen to get your view on what does right look like. But also my second question to that is, why is this so difficult? Why is, like you talked there about, you said, sometimes we speak to our clients and well, have you spoken to them about that? Have you had a chat with them? The human element always really interests me because we can have a great performance management framework, can't we? Great onboarding process, great performance management process. But actually, why is it so hard? Because this is always the module that has the least activation afterwards on the program, which is really interesting. So I wonder if you've got any kind of under the surface knowledge you can give us there around that.
I think it's so hard because people don't like to have difficult conversations. I think they don't understand how to do it properly. So I think training around how to do good performance management, and when I say that, that's not just on that high level training, but actually what happens in the meeting. Because people don't know how people are going to react, and they don't know how to manage people, and they don't want to always necessarily tell them the things that people aren't doing great. But it's important because actually those people don't, a lot of times people don't know they're not doing that particularly well. And actually it's something that might be, kind of winding the manager up a little bit or kind of festering them away and making them frustrated. But actually, unless you express it to somebody, they don't know that at all. They have no expectation around that. So I think for me, it's very much around people don't like to have the difficult conversations, and they don't necessarily like the one-on-one. And I think they are worried about how people are going to react when they tell them. And I always think a difficult conversation is only difficult by the circumstances that they're in. Actually, if you're delivering a job like in HR or kind of a leader within the business, at the end of the day, that's part of your role within there. So you need to learn more about it. But what I would say, and what I'm really interested in, is around emotional intelligence. So I think the more that you understand your people, the more that you understand how potentially they might react, and that you understand what their concept is. So I think there's a big piece around the emotional intelligence, and the more emotionally aware that somebody is who's conducting the meeting, more successful the meeting actually would be during the course of it. So I think that often lies back to people just don't want that difficult conversation, really.
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and I think, and it's never easy. Like I've got my own team, like sometimes you do need to have to say something that isn't always what you would want to say, but actually it's to benefit everybody, isn't it? So the number of times we speak to people and say, well, it's gone on for months, and you say, have you spoken to them about it? Well, no, I don't know how they're going to react. Well, if you're never going to speak to them about it, you're going to continuously be frustrated about it. And that often leads to the point where, again, in smaller business, where people might say, we just want to get rid of them. We just want them out the door, which is not fair, really. It's not fair that people haven't been given all of the opportunities within that role, because very often, especially the way that the economy is now, people live hand to mouth, don't they? So if someone's got a week's notice and they just say, look, it's just not working anymore, and you exit them and they've got a week's notice, then actually you're putting people in a really difficult situation from a personal point of view. So those conversations, and when we're saying about doing it properly and doing it right, are so important for everybody's benefit. And don't get me wrong, there's some people that react really badly to it, and they're going to react badly to it. So really you put your contingency in place of, right, if they do A, B and C, what are we going to do on each of those reactions, and how are we going to manage the situation to the best of your ability? So I think those bits are really important, to think about what ifs. So actually you can do your management control of, if somebody leaves a performance management meeting and they're furious and they start banging things around, like how are you going to manage that situation? Or if you leave it and actually over the next couple of weeks, someone kind of really, changes and they're kind of really low, actually what are you going to do to make that better? It's no good just doing it just now and then have another conversation in 2 months' time. when actually someone's been really affected by what's been said and done at the time.
It's that consistency, isn't it? Because I see great pockets going on with leaders, great pockets of getting into the difficult situation once they've planned it and got some support to do that. But then it's keeping that up. It seems to be the thing. These conversations, these one-to-ones, or this continual optimizing opportunities just seem to just get pushed aside for the busy workday or whatever else is going on, and that consistency just isn't there. It's not, that's something that I see.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I think it's something that always comes lower down the list of things to do. If there's something operational comes up, I think people will jump on the operational thing and be quite happy to push a performance management situation down. I think the bit that people miss is that ultimately the employees are your greatest assets, because without the employees doing their role right and putting the value in that needs to be, then your business isn't anything without that. So I think people don't always categorise that in the right way, and see the importance around it, or think actually wouldn't just move that further down the path because there is this, bigger issue that takes place. And that is, it does happen within a business, isn't it? You do prioritise in different types of ways. I say I've got my own team, and you do sometimes think, actually, we've all got loads on, let's cancel that meeting and let's do this. But actually, as I've just said, we've took 2.5 hours this morning there to be able to kind of sit and go through, right, okay, what's the strategy for the next quarter? What does it look like? What do we need to think about? What type of marketing can we do? And actually, we've all got loads on our plate that we could have gone off and done today, but actually that was a really important aspect for the business and the business growth of it. It's the same with performance management, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a common mistake that I see is, leaders tend to, it's like an add-on, or we do when we're in a crisis, not as part of a prevention of optimizing our workforce and keeping them great, continually going forward. So in terms of like the modern workplace, what are you seeing in terms of the challenges that managers face when they're performance managing people? What challenges do you see them come up against?
I think from a challenge point of view, I think it's, as you say, the consistency. It's about making sure it's being done. It's about making sure it's being done right, as we said. And done right is not just kind of your paperwork element of it, but that your manager knows how to deal with the situation. That it's kind of ongoing, because many of them will just want to ignore it, and not really engage in it. And I think from a business point of view, they need to make sure that they're providing all the tools appropriate to ensure that that's consistent across the board, So you need to be able to deliver on everything that's required as part of it. So I think there are challenges along the way, but I think it's the same as anything. People allow it to be a challenge, don't they?
Mm.
People want to avoid a situation, or they don't want to particularly do it, or they prioritise something differently. So I think really it's got to be from the business driver has to be that there's performance management. And one of the bigger businesses that we're dealing with last year, they didn't have any performance management. We went in, and it's kind of a seasonal type of business, and they needed new bonuses to be done with it, so bonuses and kind of KPIs to be set. So we've had to put very much like an interim system in for this year to be able to kind of make sure that people knew what was going to happen for the following 12 months, or kind of their seasonal part of it, for the following 9 months, of how it would work, because we needed to do something. But again, my concern was then about, is everyone delivering it in the right way, because the messages, and actually are everybody identifying things like objectives? Are they making sure that they're measurable all the time? Are they making sure it's consistent and they're measurable? How are they going to review that in 12 months' time? How are they going to sit down and do that review? So sometimes it's got to be very much driven in that particular business. We kind of said, right, okay, you've got 3 weeks. Everybody needs to have them done the next 3 weeks. That's then going to be based upon bonuses that are going to take place in that particular business. They were doing a bonus related, or people might do a pay related. So they're so important to do right if you're going to attach something else to it as well, bonus, pay, etc.
Mm. It's so important to make sure that that relationship has been there all year, to go and then have those really good conversations and attach those things to. And that kind of led on to my next question, which was about effective tools and systems that you kind of know of and you use for evaluating performance. Can you give our listeners any kind of tips on that, on how to track performance, if you like?
I think sometimes it's just about trying to keep it as simple as possible. I think some of our businesses work with just as easy as an Excel spreadsheet, just to be able to kind of people's names on the bottom. In March, Louise did this really well. In December she did this, and in September she was rubbish at doing that. Because actually, otherwise you get to doing this once a year. You sit down, you only remember the last 2 or 3 weeks. If they haven't performed particularly well in that, very often people forget all the great things that have happened prior to it. So I think it's about being able to kind of keep that focus there of actually being consistent through the year. And it can be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document that you have for each individual person. So I think that's really important. I mean, there are systems that are out there to be able to do it. You know, a lot of the HR management systems, quite a few of our clients use this Breathe HR. You can record people's data on there as well. So at least, again, you've got some information and something to be able to roll back on and to be able to look at as you go through. So I think it's definitely about that consistency of the information that's being provided to people, because it's not just 2 or 3 weeks before, it is 12 months or 6 months.
Yes.
And if you've got 20 staff, how are you going to remember everything great that Louise has done in that year? You're not, so you need some way to be able to record the data.
Yeah. No, that's good. Okay, thank you. So in terms of like, I was just picturing there when you were talking about that 2-week window where you haven't documented anything as a manager. We've all been there. We're then going into appraisal. You remember the last 2 weeks probably hasn't been so great. And then the conversation is really naff. It's just not a great optimizing conversation. We didn't mean for it to be here, but this is where we find ourselves sometimes. If we're going to think about providing great constructive feedback that's motivating in one of those meetings, how would we go about that? Have you got any tips for us?
I think, well, a perfect example of you've just said there, you've got that 2 weeks, it's completely demotivated the person. They leave the room thinking, well, I was much better than that. They then become frustrated. So it's then, how are you going to make sure that you then manage a situation that shouldn't have been what it was in the first place? So these are all the things that we, as you said at the beginning, kind of what is getting it right look like. And this is the type of thing it is, isn't it? So it's about how, upon the point that someone's leaving the meeting, that you make sure that they are motivated to do their role. That if you're giving them the opportunity, we would always ask about what additional support's needed, what additional training's needed, kind of what do they need on a day-to-day basis, on a month-by-month basis. So to be able to provide that opportunity to ask them that hopefully builds a little bit more motivation by the time they're leaving it. But if it has been a difficult meeting, putting things in place to actually keep the motivation high, if it might be a weekly check-in, it might be on a Friday, you just have a quick informal chat with them to be able to do it. Or you might kind of then think, well, actually, I'll buddy them up, or I'll kind of do a mentor type thing with them and identify someone in the business who's able to do that. So I think there's many different things that you can do as motivating factors, that when somebody leaves the meeting, that they are at a strong point, or certainly if they're not, that actually how you can help them to maintain to be at a good level. So an example, one of the businesses that we've been working in, there's 2 guys over the last couple of days that we've been doing disciplinaries on, and they're literally devastated by the disciplinaries. They're kind of completely rock bottom. I did the meeting on Wednesday. Thursday I've done the outcome to them, but today I'm going back in purposely to go and see them, to kind of just make sure that they're okay, that they're comfortable, that their well-being's okay. Well-being and mental health talked about all the time now. And example of one of those guys, this time last year, he had a big situation at work, and he ended up being off work for 2 months because nobody supported him. He had the company paid for counselling and thing, but the day-to-day in-house, nobody supported him. So it's kind of, how do you keep the people at a good place? Ultimately, you want them to be well, you want them to be well in the workplace, looked after, and then be able to perform in their role as well. It's a bit of a sideline there, but just an example of how you need to keep that motivation ongoing, don't you?
Yeah, totally. And just because you're you could find yourself in a hot spot around performance, it doesn't mean to say that that dictates the rest of your time with that workplace or for the future. I always think of performance management as an opportunity to create something for the next leg of the journey, and something that's different and create positive change. So picking people up like that and looking at the well-being as a result of the process is amazing practice. You touched on well-being there, which is close to my heart, because whenever I'm helping leaders with soft skills in performance management conversations or difficult conversations, I'm always got my eye on the well-being of the person delivering the kind of review, if you like, or the conversation, but then also the person who's receiving that information and how it can impact on their well-being. And we pack lots in there around like the emotional intelligence you just talked about. So that's really good that we're linking all this together. One of my big things is about, in the moment, obviously we need to deliver these performance reviews or these one-to-one conversations, but in the moment, having that emotional intelligence to actually read exactly what's happening in front of you. Is that person ready for a performance management conversation? Are they well enough? How is their well-being, their resilience, and that kind of thing? Have you got any examples of anything in your work where you've seen those kind of things play out around well-being first rather than performance, if you like?
Yeah, I think, it's really important to take those things into consideration. I mean, that example that I just give there, when that guy's come, well, actually both of them, when they came into the meeting, they were both struggling. And I don't know, I'm talking disciplinary as opposed to performance management. And as I say, it's your most recent, as in, because it's just been over the last couple of days. But actually, it's about being able to kind of put stop points in there to be able to ensure that actually, are you okay to start the meeting? If you're not comfortable, we can take a break before we start, or make sure that they've got someone who's going to accompany them to the meeting, because that's really the business choice. I mean, when you talk about accompaniment, we say like within a formal meeting is when someone should, is allowed the opportunity to bring somebody. But actually, as a best practice, if you know that someone's struggling and they've got someone that they're really kind of either rely on at work, and sometimes it's not always necessarily somebody that they work with. Sometimes I don't know, if it's someone that's young, it might be a case that they want to bring their parent with them or something. And as long as they kind of, take the tone of the meeting and understand what their role is within the meeting, there's absolutely no reason not to offer that as being an offer of support to be able to do it. So there's a lots of different things that you can do, but I think certainly pausing during the course of the meetings, and a lot of people just want to get on with it, especially if it's difficult. They just want to move on. So sometimes you have to then take that opportunity to say, do you know what, let's just pause, let's have a break. I need a break, you need a break, let's just have a break. And it may be a case that you reconvene later that day, or it might be the next day. But I think it's always really important during the course of the meeting to check in on their well-being, to be able to ask them how it is that they are, and just understand their circumstances of where they're at as well. And we don't always know everything, and sometimes people won't tell you anything, but it's about trying to read their response. And some people will be very guarded, some people will just be yes, no answers in things. So it's about, do you push a little bit more? Do you think, actually, no, we just need to step this back a little bit? Is it a conversation for a later date? It's all those things that you need to kind of take in, and you're very much in the moment of when you need to do it. Obviously, with working in HR for such a long time that it is, I can pick that up and read it quite quick, but you'll be surprised that we do emotional intelligence assessments on leaders. And actually, when you get their reports back and you're seeing that actually they've got no, emotional intelligence in particular areas, it might be around empathy, or it might be about relationship skills, they're actually quite concerning. Because if someone that isn't empathetic and can build a good relationship, then actually those conversations become even more difficult. They don't want to have them, then they do have them. It's too direct. They just think, I've got a message to deliver. And years gone by, and I'll still make reference to this when we're doing training, is when I worked in automotive, I was probably about 26, 27, and there was a guy who was probably late 50s at the time. He'd been in the army, he'd got an MBE for providing services around charity and stuff. And I just had a message to deliver. I just needed to go out there, tell him this is what it was. And I did it to everybody. This man completely lost it with me. He completely kicked off with me. And I remember being in this porter cabin, and there was an office at the back of it, and literally the door flung open and he hit it off the table, and the whole building shook because of it, the fury, and he stormed out of it. And I thought, didn't do that very well, did it? But it was one of those prominent moments in my career-wise where I think you actually take it on to think, how could I have done that differently? And that's where you become a strong manager or a leader, because actually you then recognise, I didn't do that very well. What can I do different next time? And actually, how can I make sure that I can build that relationship with that individual where those things really make a difference to them? I think that part of it really plays a really important role in how people deliver the difficult conversations or performance management. Because if it's positive, it's all nice, it's fluffy, it's good, isn't it? And the structure there, and you can kind of move things forward. If it's a little bit more difficult, then that's where you need to be able to take that gauge a bit more.
No, I think that's a really good story. And that skill of reflection is massive, isn't it? Because I always say to managers and leaders when we're practicing these skills in the life skills session on the programme, that's why we're here to do this, because it's not always going to go how you expect it to go, or you're going to overplay some strengths you didn't know you had, and all those kind of things. And that's where we kind of adjust all of this. So that reflection then afterwards is huge. And those kind of moments stick with you, don't they, in your career as well?
Yeah. Without a doubt. And I often say, kind of from the reflection piece, they might not have a huge team, they might only have 2 or 3 people, and situations only come up every now and again. And I'll say, just have a notebook, once you've come away from a meeting, that you're potentially not going to have a similar type of meeting for a period of time. Just make some notes to say how it's gone through, kind of what you did good, what you could have done better, and actually what you were awesome at. Write that down, because then next time you come across it, you've got something to refer back to, and you don't, you go into it a little bit more prepared. I think, just talk about preparation, one of the things that we do as a business, really, we always prepare when we go into meetings. So we never just go in blind. So when you're doing performance management, yes, you'll have your set structure of what the meeting template should look like, but actually making sure you've got your facts and your data there and it's recorded. And one of the real reasons I think about doing that is because actually any meeting can go off in any different tangents all over the place. but actually you need to keep it on track because you still have something that you need to do, and you've got a set outcome of what it is that you need to deliver. So to be able to do the preparation, I can't say anymore how important that actually is to be able to deliver on that side of it.
Yeah. No, this is all packed with useful tips. So I'm just going to kind of like round up what I've got so far from everything you said. There's things like, how do we do it right? Well, there's the thinking and planning beforehand about the conversation. There's the consistency, making sure we're consistent in our leadership around performance management, optimizing people, always recording the journey. I've got that one down. I thought that was super important. It's not just that moment in the conversation, it's the journey. Reflection on how we're doing when we do it, and we can always improve on that, and using our emotional intelligence to help regulate that and prepare. And then obviously the prepare bit is then also keeping it on track, because this could go in multiple directions. So there's quite a lot there and quite a good comprehensive list. Is there anything else that any other sort of top tips you would give apart from what you've shared with us there on having difficult conversations or tackling underperformance when we see it? Have you got any other kind of tips for us?
I think it's about confidence. I think when you're the person that's leading the meeting, you need to be confident about what you're going in to do. I think if you, and this is not the right terminology, just to clarify, if you show some part of weakness in what it is that you're doing, and you're lacking in the confidence in a particular area of it, I think that comes across. And I think that, yes, it shows your vulnerability, but actually sometimes you don't need to show your vulnerability because you're managing the situation. So I think it's about trying to build enough confidence in it. And I'm saying that we're not all experts at anything that we do, but being confident enough to be able to go into it and being comfortable with it, I think is a really important aspect of it. And I think just the consistency definitely is so important on it as well. And when it comes to like difficult conversations with regard to poor performance, which is kind of, as I said at the beginning, you've got the two different aspects. You've got your appraisal part of it, or however you want to frame it as being, and then you've got the actual poor performance. I think your poor performance, you still have to give people the motivation of they obviously have done something well, so include that information within there. But what I've found when we do those conversations are sometimes people just need direction. So again, at the beginning I said that, the standards there, well, you just expect that they're going to be able to do that. But actually, without some clear direction, sometimes people don't know what it is that it's doing. So we did one a couple of years ago, and he was the guy had to sell tractors. So as you can imagine, tractors are quite expensive. They're kind of like, £500,000. And he needed to sell a certain number of tractors and sell a certain number of buckets and brushes. But what we'd said to him was, each day you need to make 10 calls. You need to do this number of visits over a week. You need to do this number. This is what's expected for you by the end of the month. We expect that you're going to sell a tractor, 10 buckets, however, whatever it was. So the guy's performance improved so much in that short amount of time over the next month when we met with him, because actually we thought they have a lost case. We're not going to get any further with being able to do anything to be able to make an improvement. The guy had been in the business, he'd just been on a steady decline. Nobody had spoken to him about it. We did this meeting with him. He just completely transformed. So over the course of a month, he'd sold a tractor, which he'd never sold for a year. He'd done this, so we were able to then kind of like genuinely sit down and go, this is exactly what it was. It was a really effective performance management. So we're going to keep on monitoring your performance because you obviously like the direction that's there. So we were able to do that over the coming months. As soon as we stopped doing it, he went back to his old ways. And if you think of like the value of some of the things that he was selling machinery and stuff as well. So the value of what he was selling was big value, and it was around COVID time. So obviously everyone's struggling financially, but he could sell, he could do it. But then as soon as we stopped, the business kind of left him for 6 months, just because we had meetings over about a 6 month period, and he was doing amazing. Stopped for 6 months, and then we're in exactly the same situation as where we'd started like a year back.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's quite interesting. Some people just need the structure, and they do need to be told what are those standards. Like, we expect you to make 10 calls a day. We expect you to do 10 visits a week, or whatever it is. The expectations were highlighted to him, and it was remarkable to see how well he did, then how much he fell back down, and then we had to start the process again.
Yeah, I find that so interesting.
Yeah, but then the business then has to make a decision, doesn't it? Because actually they've took that year to get to that point, and he's in the same place he was a year ago. Does he stay in the business? Like, how much more time, effort, and
Yeah.
Kind of that micromanagement really does he need to be able to achieve it? And actually, would he be better suited in a different role in the business? Is there something different he could do? Or is he better suited not being in the business? So they're the difficult parts of it that you then have to start making decisions because you've given every opportunity to be able to do it.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the outcome of that, it will be, well, it couldn't be fairer though, could it? Because we've obviously done the sort of intensive management and the autonomy, and we know what works for this particular person. I think, everyone's talking about lots of autonomy in leadership at the moment, and it's really super, super fashionable. And I do believe in empowerment and autonomy as number one, so people can be their best self, etc. But I do still see it in the workplace. Some people just need to know what lane they need to be in. They just need to know the boundaries. They feel safe with that. That's what they need. And they need that level of attention from their manager to be able to do that. So it is about, can we offer those two types of leadership in one through one leadership style? Or like you say, can the organisation not sustain that? I guess that they're bigger podcast episodes to have really in discussions, aren't they? But yeah, so interesting how I think there's such a crappy stigma attached to performance management. And I just think optimizing conversations are just so critical to business and employee retention. Have you seen any have you got any great sort of examples about how people's careers have grown through performance management and sustainability within or retention within an organization, how organizations have really capitalized on their performance management processes?
Yeah, I mean, a simple example again, way back when I worked in automotive, we had 2 or 3 different people that we really developed them. We kind of saw them as like shining stars that came into the business. They were working at operator level. There's 2 particular ones I'm thinking about. Working at operator level, and then after a short period of time, we thought, actually, we think they've got the capability to be able to do more. So we worked with them around what it is that they wanted to do. Did they want to get to a manager level? One did. One wanted to go through like quality route instead. So one of them we put into a team leader position and supported them in that role, continuously reviewing him. The other one went into like a junior quality position. He then later progressed up into a quality engineer. And then by the time he was leaving, because he exhausted what we had within our business, he was then leaving and going to a role as a quality manager. Now, for me, that was kind of like 3 years that would taking that opportunity. And actually, we helped change his life, from the point of view that we'd given him that support. One of the other ones, the one who went to be team leader, he then went on to be a production supervisor. He then went to production manager, all within the same business. He then decided to move into a business in across to like a parallel line into another business, which he did. And now fast forward 15 years later, he's now an operations director in one of the businesses as a manufacturer, and he's now one of our clients. So
Love that.
how it all comes back round, but actually it's got the whole idea that you've worked with him at that level that he came in the business at as being 20-year-old, maybe he's 22-year-old, and actually where he is now, it's such a vast difference. And it's so rewarding from my point of view that we were part of his journey that got him there, because actually had we not given him that opportunity, then he might not have ever got the opportunity. If he wasn't in the right business, he might never have got that opportunity. So actually, again, it's by being able to do that, you can change people's lives, and you might not always get the full benefit out of it as a business, but you certainly get someone who's really hard work and dedicated for a set period of time. In that circumstance, I think he was with the business about 5.5, 6 years. We got all that value out of him, and then he went off and provided that value into another business. But we then were able to take people through the ranks to be able to do that again. But both of those, I like the fact that we were able to make a difference in people's lives, really. And it's great being when you're in a business like that and you can see that progress that's there. You've got to buy into that, haven't you? And the other thing that I always think is important is that other people see that that's happening. So if they want to progress, then actually there's no reason that they can't. I think it really falls into then a different category really, but working into really good succession planning, looking at, as you're doing your performance, actually looking at the training element of it and really having those discussions around not just how they're performing in the role, but actually what do they want for the future. As I said at the beginning again, that, some people just are happy in that role that they're doing and they don't really want to ever do anything different. I was in one of our clients yesterday, and they'd had a couple of receptionists who had walked out quite quick after they'd been in, and they said, we just need a receptionist. We don't need somebody who wants to do anything different. I'm like, well, that's what you recruit then. You recruit. And there are people that want to be receptionists. They don't want to be anything more, but actually they can add so much value and benefit to your business by getting the right person in at the right time and being able to look after them. So the succession planning part comes and making sure that the recruitment that you do is right. So you're not putting the pressure on people that don't want to do the extra things from it as well.
Yeah. I think the biggest piece from our conversation that I've taken today is that performance management starts like it's almost like an advert, and then recruitment, onboarding. It's not just when they're in role and then we're looking at their KPIs and how they're performing and then what we need to do with that. It actually starts right at the beginning of that whole journey, that whole
Yeah.
cycle, employee life cycle. So that's been really insightful for me. Thank you.
I was just going to add one quick little thing in there. I was doing some like workshop thing with a company, and this particular company had like standards set out of what they were going to give to the employee and the employee would give to the employer, so kind of that standard side of things. And actually within there, it was around strong performance management. So people were entering the business with this like employment charter, which is what they were calling it, that the employment charter, they knew all the way through that process. So it was linked in, as you said, all the way from recruitment, all the way through the life cycle of the employee within the business. Now, if you can get it right, as I said, if you can get that right at the very beginning and take it all the way through, there's so much benefit out of that, because you're going to retain your people longer and you're going to have the right people that you want in the business doing the right thing.
Yeah, and people are really going to understand psychologically where they're at when they join the organisation, and the expectation and level of support that they're going to get in those conversations, or that it's a place where they can go to take their optimising issues that they need help with. So that two-way expectation is there, and I think that's really robust, and where we all need to get to in all organisations, I think, with this, because it is the thing that gets kind of pushed, deprioritized until it becomes a priority, unfortunately, because of the capacity in the workforce and in the workplace. So thank you so much. You've been super helpful today with all of your tips, and it's just been such an insightful conversation. We've explored performance management and how we can transform team productivity and engagement and success, and your expertise have been drawn off some incredible work in your organization, in your company. So thank you so much for tailoring all of your examples and stories. That was really, really helpful. I just want to kind of remind my listeners that performance management isn't just about the processes. It's about empowering people and aligning goals and creating an environment where everyone can thrive. And Louise has helped us unpack that today. In today's modern workplace, optimizing teams still requires lots of adaptability, but clear communication and a focus on continuous development. And we've heard lots of tips today from Louise about that. So as you go into your day, I would like you to think about what you've learned and consider how you can refine your own approach to performance management to better support your team's potential. So where can our listeners connect with you, Louise, and follow you and hook up with you?
So we've got our website that you can check us out on, which is oculus-hr.co.uk. That will be updated in the new year. We have that. We have available on LinkedIn, which is just Louise Kennedy, FCIPD. That's on there, so you can check us out there. We've also got an Oculus HR page on LinkedIn, but we're also on Facebook, Instagram, all those other type of areas there. But just kind of check us out under Oculus HR. A lot of content that we put out, and we also do monthly newsletters. So if anybody wanted to sign up to any of the newsletters, then you can do that through the website as well.
And you've also got a great podcast, because I've just tuned into that.
Podcaster, hi, yeah. So we've got, I forget about everything really. So we've got the Real World HR podcast as well. So we've got that available, and that's on kind of your Spotify and Apple, etc. as well. So we've got lots of availability and touch base points. So we just try and put as much kind of content out there just so people can understand as much as possible, really.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, and we'll get all of that in our show notes. So thank you so much.
Fabulous. Thank you very much for having me as well.
Thank you, Louise, for sharing your valuable insights, and thank you to all our listeners for tuning in. Let's keep striving to build stronger, more engaged teams, and until next time, keep leading and optimizing with the Pivot mindset. Thank you for listening to the Pivot Leadership Podcast. For any information on anything we discussed in this episode, head down to the show notes. You'll also find my Pivot scorecard there, so you can take the test and see what your Pivot score is right now. Don't forget to like, rate and share the podcast, and subscribe now so you don't miss out on any future episodes.